All right, so this is the webinar I've been wanting to do for a really, really, really long time. Suspension gets so much of the credit for whether we're riding really good or whether we're riding really poorly. And we see this especially with the pros where there's so much suspension testing and data acquisition happening and very little testing of exactly what the rider's doing. Now, in my mind, if if I make a change to my suspension, I'm not going by the feelingsometer, aka trying to feel whether it's better. I want to know whether it's better. Now, I've spent quite a bit of time with suspension improvements, we'll say. I am definitely not an expert at making changes to suspension. Maybe that'll come through in this webinar, but I've done quite a bit, and I've tried to gain a real good understanding of it, I guess we can say. So 1 year ago, I had my suspension professionally tuned from Jono at the Suspension Lab. There were a lot of changes that we made because and I didn't realize it. I had my suspension like pretty open, pretty soft, and on takeoffs of jumps, my suspension was totally bottoming out. I had no idea. So when Jono tuned my suspension, and wasn't just fiddling with knobs either. He like fiddled with the knobs, ran it through the dyno, made some internal changes to the compression, and then also fiddled with the knobs, high and low speed compression, high and low speed rebound. And he set it up perfectly. For the last year, I haven't touched that suspension. I've just been riding it exactly how he set it up because it felt really good. I had thought it felt really good before. He tuned it, it felt amazing, and I just haven't wanted to change it since. Since I've told friends and things about that, they're like, "Well, you should have been changing it in the last year. That's your fault." Uh, all these kind of things, which is yeah, totally fair enough. But I thought it felt really good, and it still does to me. So that's what I'm going to go into today. So I did 4 runs of the same exact track. One as a practice run just to warm up. One as a tuned suspension run, and I did another run, totally open suspension, and a final run, totally closed suspension. And there's some huge differences in my performance and in my braking. And I think you'll find some takeaways for you. So let's get straight into it. Here is my practice run. And as you can see, minute 46. So that's like kind of baseline. And my flow score was 26. You would expect me to improve on those as on the next run, right? So I didn't touch my suspension, went straight back up the hill and did it again. So if we do a direct comparison, I just called it tune suspension. This was my second run. I went 4 seconds faster, flow score about the same. I think it was, point something better. And uh, my brake balance was, I think, pretty similar. Yeah, pretty similar. Pretty similar. Um, wow. Okay. So they both had 46.7 seconds of braking. Quite interesting. Maybe got a little bit hotter with the tune suspension run. But one thing that was interesting is that my key opportunities did change. Like I did go faster in my key opportunities in the second run, which is this one. So I had the same key opportunities, but they looked a little bit different. So, okay, might have got a little bit worse on that one. This one, I can see already that it got smaller. Like this one's definitely longer. We're at linked to multiple break events through the corner, braked through the corner. Not ideal. So pretty high flow score there. Much lower there. So I didn't break through the corner. Quite good. Quite a good improvement. That's the kind of thing you'd expect as you run the track again. Let's see this one. Flow score 5.71. 4.91. Actually braked a little bit harder on the second run. But so, I mean, like you can see that in my flow score. The flow score is the same. I just found a few different places to kind of let off the brakes a little bit longer and find some speed. So what we're going to be looking at we're going to look at mainly these things is brake balance. Like how did my brake balance change? How did my key opportunities change? How did my time change? Because that's obviously super important. And obviously brake time, which is a big one. So if we use this as the baseline, my basically final practice run before making any changes, braked for 46.7 seconds. I should probably write this down somewhere. Braked for 46.7 seconds. 46.7. It's flow score of 26. And brake balance of 63.37. Okay, that's cool. So zero brake checks actually, which is quite good. I would have had some brake checks in this one. Yeah, one brake check. One measly little brake check. I can almost guess where it was. It's ahead of this jump where I just was, I felt a bit scared. Yeah, it is. It's ahead of that jump. There's like a step up that I was kind of just checking my brakes up because I hadn't been on the trail in a bit. So that's why it's good to do a few practice runs because our braking always seems to improve as we do a track multiple times. There's a catch there, and we'll talk about that in a sec. So that's cool. That is my baseline. Now, one of the first thing that I did, so after I did these two runs, I did an open suspension run. So let's pull that one up first. Here's my open suspension run. And if we pull up my key opportunities, it might be better to put the baseline run there. So if we look at my key opportunities, actually a little bit worse. Yeah. And now I really wanted to do this and find that there was no difference if I changed my suspension. Not because I'm a suspension hater. I really think there's really big benefits, especially for most people who are way off in setting up their suspension. I see it all the time. Way too soft, way too fast. That's usually the biggest problem I see. And I was there. And so I'm not a suspension setup hater, but what I really wanted to do, I thought I'd find no difference, but we found a difference. So, um, especially with the open suspension. So when I was riding with the open suspension, I just felt like there was no support. And when people talk about support, um, actually, I should clarify. I only touched compression. So I wound the compression to completely open front and rear, high and low speed, front and rear, compression totally open. Didn't touch spring, didn't touch rebound. I just touched compression. So that's what I mean by open suspension, completely open. It felt like there was no support. So like going through a turn and you kind of try and push into the turn, it felt like I just wanted to keep, it felt like my body wanted to keep going and that the bike wasn't going to stop that at all until it blew through the travel. Just way too soft. Real lack of control. And that's how I felt. And especially on the jumps, man, it just felt like I was going to take off into space because the bike goes totally blows through its travel. All the energy stored and needs to be released somewhere. It pushes back, and usually it pushes back when you're at the lip of a jump. And this is why people end up going over the bars a lot of times because there's not enough compression damping. So that's exactly how I felt when I was riding this. So compared to my baseline, I went 4 seconds slower. So this is the same time, same speed as not knowing the track at all, or my first run down the track. So kind of all thumbs kind of thing. My flow score was 29, so it increased. So it means I was braking more. A little bit less effective, a little bit lower health. Not a huge change. I would expect to then see a few brake checks in there as we scroll down. I braked another an additional brake event, and brake time increased by 4.5 seconds. So I braked 4.5 seconds longer with the suspension totally open. And that's just because I felt like I didn't have the control and I had to start braking earlier. Brake balance didn't get too much worse, a little heavier bias towards the rear, as we might expect. Temperature pretty much the same. No brake checks. That's surprising. I expected to see a few brake checks here, but otherwise the events look pretty similar. It's just that they ended up being longer. So I had much longer brake events. So, if you have long brake events, it means you're not able to travel really fast ahead of that brake event, and you're potentially dumping too much speed within it. So you have lower exit speed. And also, when you're braking, your suspension doesn't have the opportunity to work well for you. Like you're kind of fighting against it because every bike with every suspension system seems to be affected by braking, which is crazy that we're not tuning for braking, but that's another thing. Okay. So, yeah, quite interesting there. Let's see. So I got worse. No surprises. Let's look at the difference in my key opportunities with the open suspension and my perfectly tuned nice suspension that I've been loving so much. So flow score 5.48 in my biggest key opportunity. 5.71 in tune suspension. Okay, so I actually got a little bit better there. This one looks like I definitely got worse because I was braking all the way through the corner. So 4.14 versus 2.89. So that's definitely a big deal. And this one, the second key opportunity, it became much bigger here. So 4.55 versus 2.37. Whereas, on my tuned bike run, I was able to get off the brakes in the turn and carry some nice exit speed. So I was leaving like plenty of time out there. Wonder how my brake balance is in this one. 72.28 versus 69.31. Okay. Quite interesting. Quite interesting. If we switch to all brake events, I wonder if I see a difference there. Computers. I'm asking a lot of the computer right now because I'm recording via the web. And you can't see huge differences here, but if I highlighted each event, you might see that has a different flow score, like a much higher flow score, this one. Oh, wow. Braking all the way through that corner. That's interesting. Show me that brake activity. Yeah, cool. Oh, yeah. So, like, kind of tapping it through the corner there. Really feathering that. Interesting. If we click on that one, it'll show us. Yeah, okay. So really feathering it. Whereas this one, you can see I'm like on the brakes, off the brakes completely. That's over a jump as well. Like kind of a hip jump. Whereas this one, I'm just kind of actually not too bad. Then I'm off it, obviously, for the jump and back on it for the landing because it's pretty fast. So, yeah, so definitely some big changes there. So I guess I didn't expect it. I kind of expected there to be no difference, but as soon as I started riding it, I was like, man, this feels terrible. It's like scary. I haven't had like totally open suspension like that blowing through the travel in a year. So, yeah, it felt scary. That's maybe not a huge surprise looking back. So let's look at the totally closed suspension. Totally closed suspension. Okay, let me hide that quick. Now, closed suspension, what I mean here is I totally wound plus, so more compression damping, high and low speed, front and rear. So in the rear, I have I think it's the Fox X2 front Fox 36 with a Grip 2 damper. I totally wound those totally closed. Some people might call this like a lockout, but the cool thing with Fox is it isn't a lockout. It's compression adjustment. It doesn't completely lock it out because if you're riding a trail bike and you're completely locking out your suspension, you're kind of missing the point. There's really never a need for that. And it definitely, in my opinion, doesn't help you climb faster because these bikes are big, bulky, and heavy, and you need the suspension to kind of move when you get to bumpy climbs anyway. I never touch that stuff when I'm climbing. Never, ever. Not even on my XC bike. I don't touch it. It only really makes a difference if you're standing out of the saddle and it just feels better. I've never seen any real indication that you're going to ride faster if you lock out your suspension. And that's definitely one of the greatest misunderstandings in mountain biking. So we'll just leave that opinion and we'll carry on. So closed suspension, I totally turned them all the way closed. You might call it locked out, but I was surprised even with the X2, it wasn't locked out. Like there's still a bit of movement. So I rode around the parking lot. I was like, okay, this feels hard. It felt hard. But I was like, I think I could live with this. As soon as I sent myself down the run, same way as usual, didn't pedal, nothing. I just like totally blacked out in a good way, like getting in total flow state. So as soon as I dropped into the trail, I was like, nothing was in my mind, nothing at all. I wasn't thinking about the bike. I wasn't thinking about all the 3 runs I did previously. I wasn't thinking about how scary the trail was. It was just nothing, total flow state. And it took me until about halfway down the trail where I realized, I was like, I just feel good. This just feels amazing. This feels great. And it was totally closed suspension. So I ended up riding better. I ended up riding faster. That's basically what I'm getting at. And like quite a bit faster. So 5 seconds faster with totally closed suspension versus totally open suspension. This totally closed suspension was 1 second faster than my baseline run. And yeah, just faster than the baseline run, which was 2 runs before. And I braked way less. My flow score went from a 26 down to a 23. That's a big difference. So if we look at total brake time, I went from 46.7 seconds on the first 2 runs down to 42.8. So almost 4 seconds less braking compared to baseline with totally closed suspension. Now I know like the first thing that's going to come up is, well, yeah, you've learned the track. And like, yeah, 100% an element of learning the track. But I ride this track quite a bit. I've ridden it hundreds of times. It's like one of my go-tos to finish a ride because it goes right to the car park, or I can ride home because it's not too far of a ride from home. So I know the track and I know what I'm doing. So I made, you would expect that from your sighting run to your first like proper baseline run, you would definitely expect the difference. But I wouldn't have expected to learn too much while not focusing on really learning anything or not sessioning my key opportunities, nothing like that. I wouldn't have expected to learn too much throughout that. So take that part, the learning element, for what you will. And one thing missing from this is I didn't go back to baseline and try and run that again. So that comparison isn't in here, but this is a huge difference. Totally locking out my suspension, totally closing my suspension. I went faster, braked less. What else do we notice? So no brake checks. That's good. I kind of stopped brake checking this one. Way fewer long events, so I was able to get on the brakes hard, get off the brakes. That's really good. That's how you ride in control. That's how you ride fast. Is you get it done when you need to get it done, and the rest of the time you're focusing on your riding. So let's look at this difference in these key opportunities between totally open, which is how I find most people run their bikes, way too open on their suspension. Let's see how my key opportunities changed. So same areas because I didn't stop to session this at all. Key opportunities are in the same spots, but they should look quite a bit different. Let's go straight to key opportunity 1, that red one. So I went from a 5.48 the run before to 4.57. Big improvement. So 20% improvement on the flow score, and actually more even braking by the looks of it in this key opportunity. So slightly more. This one was total time of 6.1 seconds. Here I was total time of 5.4. So that was what helped me chop down my brake time. The one after that, we actually talked about this one in the last podcast episode that we did, where I talked about these multiple lines into the rutted section and how this is always one of my weaknesses, and it's on the list for the brake ace method. So went from a 4.14 to a 3.33. Huge improvement again. And this one, and this is where like even here I still was kind of in the blacked out state where I wasn't thinking about anything. I was probably only here that I realized, oh yeah, I'm in complete flow state. This is what I'm trying to achieve every time I'm mountain biking. I went from 4.55 to a 2.04. And I think what happened is here, I totally separated it into 2 discrete brake events. Totally different. Yeah, so I was able to get off them completely in that corner, which is definitely what you want. You don't want to be dragging through every really bumpy, really rough corner. So the other interesting thing I found here is if we look at this, stop doing that. If we look at right here around the 60-second mark, in the open suspension run, I had quite a bit of braking, and this was like a real fast G out step up. So there's like a tabletop, and you can pump real hard into it, and then you can just like float the next step up jump. Which it's like a short step up, but it's a step up anyway. And like the way you like push into the face of the step up, like you're looking at it, is just like a big wall. With the open suspension, I totally did not feel comfortable hitting that, so I had to brake quite a lot, obviously heading into that. This one didn't become my key opportunity because I didn't take away that much speed, but you can see how I slowed down quite a lot after it. But in the totally closed suspension, I hit the tabletop perfectly, and I hit the step up like more than perfectly, like probably the best I've ever hit it. I was able to get significant downside speed and just carry on through there. And I was just like, man, this feels amazing. So I didn't break there at all with totally closed suspension. I just hit the jumps, hit the downsides, and kept riding. I couldn't have asked for better. I think in terms of what I'm going to do from here on out, I'm not sure if I'm going to keep running it completely closed, but I think it's worth experimenting with more compression damping. For me, on the trails, like they're riding real fast at the moment, is probably something that I should be changing more regularly and adjusting as I improve and as the conditions of the trails improve. I don't really like to fiddle with my suspension too much, but I'll run it completely closed on heaps of other trails for a while and then probably revert back to my original settings plus some compression damping. I'm never ever going to run completely open suspension. I think I've learned a lot since that original tuning day with Jono, and where he showed me how my suspension was uh, totally bottoming out on the face of jumps, and my confidence has increased heaps since that day. I'm never going to go back to this completely closed suspension. And I've reflected that in the setup of my other bikes too, where I've made them harder. And I guess the best way to describe it is the bike feels pretty dead when I'm not riding trails. So if you're riding around the car park or whatever, and you push on the suspension, it feels terrible. And I've kind of started to take that as a marker for suspension that's going to feel good on the trail, because you want your wheel to stay on the ground. You don't want that wheel to constantly be pushing back at you, and you don't want to be constantly blowing through the travel. So my suspension feels pretty dead when I'm riding around in a parking lot, but it feels amazing and like I'm in complete control when I'm riding on the trails. And if we take this test into account, that's more compression damping. So that's the biggest takeaway. I feel like I ride in way more control. So if you are testing and you're changing suspension settings, and this is exactly what we did last weekend with the Envision racing team at their team camp. Jana was making tunes on their suspension. I was helping them with brake ace. We were doing this in conjunction, and we were able to see marked improvements in their performance. We weren't just going by feelings the whole entire time. Like, are we improving? And that's the biggest thing that we need to be able to see, because if I think about even my own self, I've been mountain biking for 20 years. My bike always felt amazing. I thought it was perfect. My feelings were good. My feelings were positive. And it wasn't until I got it totally changed using suspension data and totally tuned based on what I actually needed. I never would have tried that. I never would have thought it would feel good riding on the trail, but I could see my improvements, my performance improving, not only in the suspension data, but also in my braking. And now that I've changed it to completely closed suspension, maybe where it should be now that I've changed as a rider in the last year or whatever, we need to be testing for this. We can't just change our suspension based on what the suspension stuff says and take it to mean that we're going to be better riders. We need to see what the suspension changes mean for us as we're riding. And braking is that indication. So in the future takeaways, I see greater integration of suspension sensors and braking sensors, and that's a way to validate the rider's improvement based on the improvements or changes made to the bike. Because if the rider isn't improving based on the changes that we've made the wrong changes and we're going the wrong way. So the rider needs to be able to improve, and we can see that with this. One extra thing I'll add is if the sensors are in the exact same place and we're looking at them at the same time, we can see how braking is affecting the suspension tune, because we know that our bikes are going to be riding differently whether we are on our brakes or not on our brakes. We have a lot of evidence of that. Some of the suspension purists out there might think they might have specific opinions about this, but we do know that there are changes happening. Whether or not we can tune for braking is a different question, but it's good to know what's happening to our bikes under braking versus not under braking. I think the takeaways for you are, the main takeaway for you is you can try to add more compression to your bike, or try different suspension settings. Don't be scared to wind it all the way. I wouldn't have wound it all the way if I didn't do a survey on my Instagram to see where people wanted me to put my settings, but someone said wind them all the way. Well, most people said wind them all the way, so that's what I did. Try it and see what happens. And when you're making changes, make one change at a time. So in this webinar and in this series of tests, I only changed compression damping. I didn't change anything else. So I can isolate the differences that the compression damping made on my riding. I think that's the biggest takeaway for you. So hopefully you enjoyed this. I think we have a lot to say about this stuff. So we'll probably do a podcast about this on Demystifying MTB, where I show Rowan my suspension data. We might have to loop in Jono on this too, because he'll be able to explain to you what these changes mean and what it actually means on the bike. His episode is one of our most popular podcast episodes anyway, so it'd be great to have him back on, and we could just spitball these changes and share these findings with you, because we want you to ride faster, have more fun, and that's really the whole point of all this. If you enjoyed this, share it with your friends, because that really helps us out. It's hard for us to get reach. We'll see you next time.